You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozar. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 19th of September. 40 million to private firms to track down illegal immigrants. The fascist Green Party expelled councillor because of her Christian views. Man who started the summer riots last year was going to shoot, say police. 2 young WPCs gunned down in cold-blooded attack. King Richard III to have state funeral. The Reverend Robert West and his broadcast. Bomb blast in Karachi kills 6. Thought for the day for my listeners. UK news. The border agency has announced it is to put out a contract worth a total of £40 million to private firms to become bounty hunters. Amongst the firms approached are Capita, but it does follow a pro rata basis. The more immigrants contacted and deported, the more money they will earn. A pilot project with Serco revealed that 20% of the immigrants contacted returned home. Capita will contact the listed names by phone, letters, text on mobiles and email, but will not do visits. One World at 8 spokesperson commented, "Why not put up rewards of £500 to members of the public for each illegal we report? That will clear them out and boost our economy. There are no better bounty hunters like nationalists. The problem I foresee is that these firms will simply hire immigrants to shop immigrants, which simply will not work." The far-left Green Party expelled one of their Brighton and Hove councillors because she'd wanted to vote against same-sex marriages. After an investigation, councillor Christina Summers was kicked out by the Greens because, as a Christian, she could not vote in favour of something she did not believe in. However, the Greens have cut off their nose to spite their faces, because they lose their casting vote on that council. It was stated on the Archbishop Cranmer site, "This is proof, if any were needed, that the Green Party is the most utterly and offensively intolerant of all political parties." Good grief, even the BNP opens its membership to the odd black or brown-skinned person who subscribes to its political views. But God help you now if you're a tree-hugging, whale-saving, global warming-affirming Christian with traditional views on marriage. What happened to equality and diversity? It is curious how the courts have forced the extremist BNP to adapt their membership criteria to accept the majority view of race relations, while the extremist Green Party is apparently free to discriminate against the mainstream view of marriage with impunity. Perhaps the decision needs testing in the courts. After all, it's not very inclusive, is it? A World at 8 reporter comments, "I like this man, a truly open mind." The trial of Kevin Hutchinson Foster, who supplied the gun to Mark Duggan, which led to the shooting in Tottenham, which in turn sparked off the race riots in 2011, has opened in Snaresbrook Crown Court. Hutchinson Foster, 30, denies selling or transferring a prohibitive firearm, namely a BBM Bruni Model 92 handgun, to Duggan. He had received the firearm around 50 minutes earlier from Hutchinson Foster. Prosecutor Edward Brown QC said Duggan was under police surveillance on the 4th of August and was shot by a police marksman who killed him as he turned to police officers with gun in hand positioned to shoot, the court heard. The gun in question had already been used by Hutchinson Foster in an attack on a barber 6 days before the handover. Hutchinson Foster beat Peter Osadebe using the gun at the Lagoon Saloon on Kingsland Road, Dalston, East London on the 29th of July 2011. Traces of Osadebe's blood were found on the gun when it was retrieved from Ferry Lane on the 4th of August, as was Hutchinson Foster's DNA, the court heard. The trial continues. The killing of policewomen Fiona Bone, 32, and Nicola Hughes, 23, has shaken the Greater Manchester Police Force. They were attacked and murdered after a phony burglary was called in. The murderer, Cale Cregan, 29, killed both women in cold blood and then handed himself in to a police station. Chief Constable Sir Peter Fairhay, his voice shaking with emotion, said, "It would appear Cregan has deliberately done this in an act of cold-blooded murder," he told journalists, adding it was impossible to fathom such an evil act. A World at 8 writer comments, "Our thoughts are with these policewomen's families, friends and colleagues." As Cregan was thought to be in the vicinity, why were 2 unarmed women sent out without male backup? A state funeral could be underway if the skeleton found last week is found to be the remains of King Richard III. The historian and Tory MP Christopher Skidmore has commented, "If the remains of Richard III are tested correctly using DNA, then a full state funeral should take place. He was the last Plantagenet king and the last English monarch to die on the battlefield," he said. The skeleton had a metal arrow in its back and head trauma, which ties in with the death of the Plantagenet ruler and who was, in fact, the last truly English king. He had a slight curvature of the spine, but left-wing papers are writing that he was a humpback, and Shakespeare didn't do him any favours at all. In fact, he did a lot of good for his people during his reign. This presenter comments, "I've always wanted to meet Richard III. At least he stood up for what he believed in." Now I have pleasure in handing you over to the Reverend Robert West for his monthly talk.
We must all have heard recently of the slaughter of 2 on-duty women police constables in Manchester. Woman Police Constable Fiona Bone and Woman Police Constable Nicola Hughes. Norman Tebbit, the former chairman of the Conservative Party, has called for the reintroduction of the death penalty for murderers of police officers. From a Christian point of view, which is the view that I give, such is to be welcomed, for the Christian faith very clearly teaches that those who shed man's blood, by man shall their blood be shed. That is from Genesis, which is the kind of Haynes manual for society and creation. And in the New Testament, the great apostle or messenger of the gospel of redemption tells us that the ruler is not to bear the sword in vain. It is the government's duty to protect us, in other words. That is what they are not doing. But there are legal and political problems in the way of reintroducing the death penalty as well as cultural ones. Many people have become so feeble-minded when it comes to the protection of human life by the deterrent effect of the death penalty upon the perpetrators of murder. Pseudo-academics ensconced in academic universities and colleges tell us that it has no deterrent effect, yet murder has increased exponentially with the abolition of the death penalty for murder. The mainstream political parties, if I may call them that, have hardly got the guts to do what is right, the protestations of Norman Tebbit excepting. And then we have both the Human Rights Act, passed under the notorious Tony Blair in 1998, and the European Convention on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms signed way back in 1951. Both of these, as interpreted by the judges of Strasbourg, now forbid their signatory states to improve their lot and the defence of their citizens by reintroducing the death penalty for murder and high treason. The solution, it seems to me, is very simple. We need politicians in Westminster as well as in Strasbourg who will repeal the so-called Human Rights Act and who will repudiate the so-called Convention on Human Rights, because the judges have stood those pieces of law on their head, and as a result they no longer protect our fundamental rights and freedoms, as both Women Police Constables Bone and Hughes have found out. But the protection of the death penalty, to be inflicted upon murderers, I believe, must not just be available to defend police officers. The death penalty for murder, and the protection it affords us all, is surely a fundamental right for all of us. Let us pray that it will be reintroduced. The sooner the better. Christianity is a robust faith. We need it. We need to recover it, and we need to apply it.
Thank you, Reverend West, for your very interesting output. I'm sure our listeners have thoroughly enjoyed it. World news. 6 people have been killed in a bomb blast in Karachi. The blast, thought to be the work of Islamic fundamentalists, was detonated in a busy marketplace full of women and children buying groceries. Experts have been scouring the site for clues on how the bomb was made and how it was detonated. Bomb blasts in Pakistan have killed 10 people recently in public places. 3 Turkish citizens were wounded when the FSA, the rebels, and President Assad's forces exchanged fire on the Turkish-Syrian border today. It was reported from Azerbaijan by CNN Turk TV. The Turkish government moved swiftly to move residents from border villages near Syria after the fighting broke out. Syrian government officials now know that the arming of the rebels comes through that particular border with Turkey and patrol it regularly. 10 Turkish soldiers have been killed in a grenade attack by Kurdish rebels along another border, which has seen around 70 Turkish wounded as well. Thought for the day. This is especially for the people who listen to World at 8 and who take the time to send in their very welcome comments, and for those who express their points of view to each other. I have not forgotten you and I do read your emails. Now to Paul James, I'm sorry you think that sometimes I can be depressing, but of course you're right, I can and often am, because that is the only way of telling the Brits that they are overly emotional over stupid subjects and not emotional enough over their country and their future. Of course we want people to realise what is happening, but we do not want them suicidal. That would defeat what I'm trying to do. To Donna TX, now is this with a kiss or X-rated? Her comments are really very useful and very informative, but I'm especially worried by the rats being sold in a London market, albeit by Africans. There is very little of this nasty item in the Nationals or on the TV, but we are talking about spreading contagious diseases here in the UK, and the fact that the health and safety people stop kids playing conkers and rescue men actually not rescuing somebody because of a few inches of water. And yet something as vile as that bushmeat, as it is called, is selling in broad daylight on the streets of our capital city. Bonkers, politically correct crap is what it is, my friends. Someone should make sure that stall does not operate anymore. Equally worrying is the question that the Ebola virus can be carried in these illegal meat imports, which come in usually through Stansted Airport on Sunday evenings, apparently I have been told today. It stands to reason if companies at airports employ immigrants, they're going to turn a blind eye or get paid to get this obscene meat through. Now Ebola can wipe out entire continents if not checked, although it hasn't done a very good job in Africa, or we would not have this problem. But it should be a matter of concern to the Ministry of Ag and Fish to stop this and stop it now. Monkeys are also considered edible for the African palate, and these do carry diseases transferable to humans. Perhaps the people who should be monitoring these illegal imports are too busy checking up on our poor farmers and their poor hormone-dosed cows, or making sure that French and Spanish fishermen operate large fishing boats built in India in our fishing waters to care what could happen if just one of these viruses was transmitted either by bushmeat or the person themselves just flying into London. Also, these people are too busy shooting badgers who apparently spread bovine TB to their cattle. Well, stop employing immigrant Eastern European farm workers and that might help. My stepdaughter contracted TB after she was supervising Russian students in the States after a few weeks. So don't tell me that TB is not transferable from humans to cattle and vice versa. The last foot and mouth was spread by bushmeat to the home counties. Until we eradicated TB in the UK, it was a scourge and afflicted rich and poor alike. Are those times coming again through our government's stupidity in allowing all and sundry unchecked into this country? Dear, I'm no kafir. I just love this man. He's so knowledgeable and his writing is varied and interesting. I almost cried over the 130 Swedish taxpayers keeping 8 Somali bottom feeders in luxury. So sadly true. We just never stop giving in the UK, do we? On a point, there's an immigration computer database being set up to track down the 150,000 people who are overstaying or remaining in the UK illegally. It was revealed this week. The computer project is to be started next month to deal with the huge backlog of foreign nationals who have overstayed, as they politely put it. The potential partners are G4S, who failed to deliver enough staff for the Olympic Games, and another security firm who actually employed illegals. You couldn't write it, could you? They intend to send letters. Now that should help those who do not have official addresses, move around the country, or cannot even read English. The bulk of these charmers come from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, China, Brazil and Nigeria. In total, an enormous backlog of 276,000 immigration cases, and this does not include the present and ever-growing number of illegals flooding the country. Apparently the UK has become the Bermuda Triangle for immigrants, a country where it's easy to get in, impossible to keep track of, let alone get them out. I'm howling at the moon here with this huge problem that has been inflicted on my country in my time. We give foreign aid to countries like India, who reveal their true characters by the murders of hundreds of stray dogs in Mumbai, which I've always called Bombay since I went there, and I will continue to do so. This pitiful heading: An 8-month-old stray was recently found dead in a Mumbai stadium after someone strapped fireworks to his body and lit them. But local officials still aren't taking this and string of brutal violence against strays seriously. Earlier this year, distemper disease broke out amongst stray dogs, but in a complete breakdown of responsibility, municipal officials claim they couldn't do anything about it. In the wake of proper action, citizens have taken it upon themselves to control strays with brutal attacks, killings and even attempted poisonings. Why do we give these people money that does not reach the people it should? Why do we give Africans homes over here when they clearly cannot live in civilised society? Why do we continue to allow Muslim protests through our cities when our own people cannot say boo to a goose? Why do we continue to buy halal food? In a letter from Sainsbury's on a complaint about the selling of halal food, the gist of what came back was laughable. In it they say, and I quote, "Most of their food is not halal. However, sometimes they do buy from halal stockists who say the animal is stunned, or else Sainsbury's would never buy it." Now, am I stupid, or do they think we are? If an animal is supplied through a halal stockist, it has not been stunned. End of. Halal killing is the grossest form of killing known to man. Kosher, although not stunned, is carried out in a different way. In halal, the animal is hung up in a room full of his compatriots, waiting for death. His throat is cut and he is left hanging and swinging whilst bleeding out. Sometimes, apparently to speed up, his tongue is drawn through his throat. All this after a prayer, of course, which does a lot of good. A halal butcher is not trained. Kosher killing is thus. The kosher butcher is trained for 8 years. They set aside a room where the animal is taken to, his throat is cut and he is laid on a slab alone to bleed out. Not pleasant, but not as bad as the halal. Now, I do not like halal meat. All the blood is gone and it's utterly tasteless to me. Also, I'm a Christian. Why should I be forced to eat another religion's meat? From Ganglepin, his Tesco's letter is a real doozy though. They say the cost of labelling meat halal would pass the cost on to the customer. This is what follows. Pass the sick bag. We do, however, understand that there are a very small number of customers who, for religious reasons, would like to know if the meat they are eating is halal. We are very happy to be entirely transparent about this. All fresh meat we sell is not halal, except for lamb and chicken and those ranges. We can absolutely assure you that if you buy British organic lamb and chicken as well as Willow Farm and Finest free range lines, these will not be halal either. I hope you find this information helpful. Kind regards, Sarah Taylor, Tesco Customer Service. Well, Sarah, no, the amount of customers is not small. Or if small, how does that relate to relabelling for a small section of society pan out? You cannot have it all ways. Either the cranks are in short supply, ditto the labels, or the cranks are larger so the labelling would be more expensive. And organic is expensive and people go to Tesco because it's either cheap or the only shop in the vicinity, as in Borden. Now from Rick Hoven, the takeaway warning, which is wonderful. In short, do not trust any takeaway. Curry, like French food in the Middle Ages, was invented because the spices took away the smell of decay. It isn't trendy to buy takeaways. You simply do not know if you're eating rat or dog and in fact could be eating both. According to this guy, many hospitalisations are due to takeaway crap, but they're rarely reported. Well, of course, not much like the poor old rats in London. Just let the disease creep up and then deny is the way to go, apparently. It really is up to us to make a stand. Even if deeply depressed, and sometimes I even depress myself, I will stand and yell in defiance of what is happening to my country and people. Sometimes through the love of their tummies as well, but mainly through the lackadaisical attitude of the establishment and the money-grubbing corporate companies and supermarkets. Let their directors eat rat. Keep commenting, my friends, and keep the faith. We need you all in the fight to come. And finally, the Great Escape, Mexican style. Texan prison officers and officials have been baffled over a prison escape of around 130 prisoners from its high-security jail. The escapees, mostly Mexicans, had somehow dug their way through the earth and made a huge tunnel with ropes and cables. When the prison warders clocked onto work, they found nearly all the Mexicans had gone. But where? One person commented, "Expect plenty of car washes springing up around the United States in the next few weeks. I've heard of the Great Escape, but this is crazy." You have been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynne Mozar and I wish you all a very good night. Grief, even the BNP opens its membership to the odd black or brown-skinned person who subscribes to its political views. But God help you now if you're a tree-hugging, whale-saving, global warming-affirming Christian with traditional views on marriage. What happened to equality and diversity? It is curious how the courts have forced the extremist BNP to adapt their membership criteria to accept the majority view of race relations, while the extremist Green Party is apparently free to discriminate against the mainstream view of marriage with impunity. Perhaps the decision needs testing in the courts. After all, it's not very inclusive, is it? We'll learn. A pilot project with Serco revealed that 20% of the immigrants contacted returned home. Capita will contact the listed names by phone, letters, text on mobiles and email, but will not do visits. One World Today spokesperson commented, "Why not put up rewards of £500 to members of the public for each illegal we report? That will clear them out and boost our economy. There are no better bounty hunters like nationalists. The problem I foresee is that these firms will simply hire immigrants to shop immigrants, which simply will not work." Last year was going to shoot, say police. 2 young WPCs gunned down in cold-blooded attack. King Richard III to have state funeral. The Reverend Robert West and his broadcast. Bomb blast in Karachi kills 6. Thought for the day for my listeners. UK news. The Border Agency has announced it is to put out a contract worth a total of £40 million to private firms to become bounty hunters. Amongst the firms approached are Capita, but it does follow a pro rata basis. The more immigrants contacted and deported, the more money they. The far-left Green Party expelled one of their Brighton and Hove councillors because she'd wanted to vote against same-sex marriages. After an investigation, councillor Christina Summers was kicked out by the Greens because, as a Christian, she could not vote in favour of something she did not believe in. However, the Greens have cut off their nose to spite their faces, because they lose their casting vote on that council. It was stated on the Archbishop Cranmer's site, "This is proof, if any were needed, that the Green Party is the most utterly and offensively intolerant of all political parties." Good.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynne Mozar. The World at 8, the number 1 in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 19th of September. 40 million to private firms to track down illegal immigrants. The fascist Green Party expelled councillor because of her Christian views. Man who started the summer